Alrighty, here. Wanted to record a podcast on this since I already wrote a little bit of an article, so let me roll some music here real quick. Alrighty. So this will be Pod42 since I already recorded a Pod42 of a Page of Plato episode that I wasn't particularly happy with, and I've slightly fallen off as far as my recording of these podcasts is concerned, so this is more regular, and so whether it's pod 42 or 43 or whatever, it's more or less irrelevant. But the thing I'm interested in discussing today is just a little research project I did yesterday to look into basically the Boston Celtics, and during the last two playoffs, and this might have been a bit of a limited sort of time span to be looking at. Maybe you needed to look the last 3 or 4 playoffs. But I was basically tracking, or what I wanted to do was track how many times they've lost 15 plus point leads in the past 2 playoff runs. And the premise of this was that they're basically an amazing team and amazingly well accomplished for the number of times they've surrendered leads like those, and in a lot of cases still won those games. And so it's kind of how I went into it, and the empirical data kind of cut against my assumption a little bit, but only in the sense that some of the leads they lost weren't quite as large as I thought they had been, but there were certainly a number of instances where they were leading by very large amounts and then essentially lost more off of their lead in the losing of it than you would have expected. So just a concrete example would be Game 1 of Round 1, 2024 versus the Heat. Celtics win 114-94, which means they won by 20, but their max lead was 34 points, and the closest margin after that largest lead was 14. And so even in that Game 1, you have literally them losing 20 points off their lead before winning by 20, which is obviously kind of the name of the game, but I think it was the start of a trend that was definitely something that was noticeable last playoffs, and then this playoffs has become really manifest in the Knicks series where and I wrote about this in the article, so I may pull up my little article, not the one about Stephen Miller, fucking goblin, but the Celtics have lost 2 20-point leads in the last 2 games against the Knicks, and arguably should have won both of those games, and didn't. And, what a tragedy that a basketball team would lose a playoff game. But, Game 1, Celtics lead 75-55 with 5:47 left in the third. And then in Game 2, they led 70-50 with 4:05 left in the third. And so those 2 examples are examples of the Celtics having a 20-plus point lead or a 20-point lead in both of those cases. In their run in the last couple playoffs, they've had leads that were bigger, but 20-point margins that were subsequently narrowed, and then either in these cases, like with the Knicks games, they lost these games. In a lot of cases over the last few playoffs, they've ended up winning games where they've lost substantial amounts off of a lead. And so, I wrote in my article, I said, I'm not the first person to ever notice that basketball games these days are largely defined by runs. In the sense that one team will go on a run, the other team will be in a shooting drought, and they will go scoreless for 4 or 5 minutes, and Usually both teams will go through that at some point in the game, and so basically you're never going to make every single shot. But for the Celtics, what seems to happen is when they're leading by so much, part of the point of it is that they're such a good team, such a strong team, that they are able to build up these, frankly, gigantic margins during games, and that's a testament to how good they are. But then, whether it's kind of the metaphor of letting your hand off the wheel, whatever you sort of want to think of it as, there have just been lots of instances where the Celtics have been in a more comfortable game where they were winning by 20 plus points, 15 plus points, only to have the game become much closer, or in a couple cases, as I found, one case in particular against the Cavs last year, they were tied at halftime only to lose that game by 24 points. And so, again, criticizing the Celtics for their performance in the last couple playoffs is challenging, because especially last year when they lost 1, 2, 3 games total in the playoffs while winning 16, they acquitted themselves very well. But, when you look at it more closely, you can see instances where they lost leads. So just to roll through it, because I did this in my article a bit. So in round 1 versus Miami in 24, like I said, game 1, leading by 34, won by 20, and the closest margin was 14. So they lost a good amount off of their lead. And then in game 2, they lost 101 to 111, presumably at home, right? High seed. So that would have won the series, which is less than ideal, but also stealing home court from somebody in the NBA these days is still meaningful, but it means less, I think, than it did in the past. But the 24 Heat took game 2, where the Celtics had a 6-point lead in the second quarter, and then the third quarter was a fight in the fourth quarter as well. So competitive game, even though the Celtics lost by 10. They got the margin down to 4 when they were down in the fourth. So, and it may seem like I'm focusing much on this Miami series that's got the most detail and research into it, and it does, but that's because the Celtics and Miami Heat have played some of the best playoff series in the past several years. But when you look at games 1 and 2, game 1, obviously a 20-point victory. That's the sort of thing you want. Game 2, losing by 10 at home. I think you'd love to avoid that. But then I think if you knew you were going to 4-1 a series and you were guaranteed you were going to win in 5 games, then the proposition of losing at home once starts to mean a little less. And so game 3, the Celtics led by as much as 29, end up winning by 20. So obviously they won by a lot. They crushed them. The lead was, anywhere from 26 to 29 for a lot of the game, and it got down to 20 at the end. But that's not what I'm going to consider losing a major lead. I think the game 1 of going from a 34-point lead to a 14-point lead is much more so along the lines of what I'm talking about than leading by 29 and going down to 20. So that was that for game 3, 104-84, Celtics win. Then game 4, 102-88, so 14-point margin, where the Celtics had, again, a 28-point lead, and the closest margin after that was 13, with the end difference of 14. So when you look at it, you'd say in the first 4 games of the series, the Celtics have had the lead in every single game. So not only could they have potentially won every single game, but they were winning by a lot. And then when I get to game 5, it will reinforce this point, and then we'll be able to do some addition, some adding, some math, some creative math. But to have a 34-point lead, a 29-point lead, a 28-point lead, these things are indications that you're a better team than the team you're playing, a substantially better team. But then also, if those leads are getting cut down significantly, that's a data point as well. And so in that game, like I said, they lost 15 points off their lead, but won by 14, so it's a comfortable margin, but they definitely lost a little bit off the lead, and they lost more off their lead than their end differential. So then if we were counting, we'd probably say so far in this series they've lost, that would be the second lead they've lost. I'm not going to consider them losing game 2 to be quite the same, even though you could count it and you could say then they've lost 3 leads, not in the sense that they're losing, but that their leads are substantially cut down to where, when you're up by 20, only, like I wrote this in the article, if the other team makes 4 threes and you don't make anything, that's a run where all of a sudden you go from a 20-point lead to being up by 8. Now you're within single digits. You're only a few possessions away from a tie game potentially, etc. So that's why I'm saying it's significant to go from a 20-point lead where theoretically you have a buffer zone of several possessions until they're going to get within range of you. And I think ideally you would want to keep people away, although, right, like it's professional basketball, and so the other team is never going to lie down where they shouldn't. They're always going to fight back and make a match of it. And so you have to take that into consideration. Just because you're winning by 34, 28, 20, etc., doesn't mean you're going to win by that margin. And, you may be building up a margin so that when the other team makes their run, that you can absorb that sort of punch in the face and continue fighting and not get knocked out by their effort there. So that's game 4, and again, win by 14, so that's a nice win. But like I've said, in modern basketball, that game is both closer than it appeared and not. So interesting. And then game 5, no lead loss there. The Celtics simply, they crushed them again. They were up by 35, their largest lead, and they won by 34. So you do the math on that. They kicked the shit out of Miami in that game 5, and it doesn't include a lead loss. So if we're counting again, so that's game 1, I'd consider that a lead loss because they lost 20 points off a lead. Game 2, I'd consider that a lead loss because they lost, and I know I'm changing from a couple minutes ago, but I just recounted and realized why I had the number 3 there. So they lost the lead in game 1, ended up winning the game, lost the lead in game 2, ended up losing the game at home, and then in game 4, lost 15 points off their lead. So if we're looking at sort of the premise of what I was talking about, it's these large leads, these leads of 30 plus points, 20 plus points, 25 plus points, and then a reduction in the margin. So in the game 1, they still won very comfortably, even though they lost a lead. And so for a series recap, it'd be 3 leads lost, leading to 1 loss, 2 closer margins. So really not a big deal, but something that's noticeable, and I would argue is the first example of a bit of a trend in recent sort of Celtics playoff history. And then, so to move on to round 2 last year, which when I was recalling, I didn't even recall that they played the Cavaliers in the second round last year. I thought they avoided them completely, but they did not. So in game 1, again, like they did in almost every series except for the next one against the Pacers, game 1, Celtics came out, killed the Cavs 120-95. So they end up winning by 25. They won every quarter. They crushed them, and the closest was a 12-point margin. So this was not an example of them losing a lead. I think they won each quarter, so they progressively built their margin in that game. Then game 2, they lost 118-94. So they lost by 24 points, and they let a tie game at half lead to them getting crushed. And they were up 6 in the second quarter, so that's definitely a lead lost. Then game 3, they won 106-93, where they won by 13. There were 11 lead changes in the game, but the Celtics led for 41 and a half minutes. Bit of a trend in this thing as I was doing this research. But then, so their 23-point lead went down to 13. So it's a 10-point loss off the lead. So I consider that a minor blowing of the lead, but still a good, solid win. And the Cavs are a good team, were last year. So if you're counting, that would be one game where they lost a lead that wasn't a major lead, and then another game where they lost a margin off a significant lead and ended up winning still by a comfortable margin. Then game 4, 109-102, Celtics lead for 43 minutes, basically a 7 to 10 point margin for most of the second half. So no lead lost there, just a competitive game. So they win by 7, but that doesn't count for kind of what we're thinking of. So that's still only 2 of those in this round. And then in game 5, they won 113-98, so they won by 15, and it's their biggest margin, slow burn victory. Although maybe you can call it game 1, but so again, for counting purposes, they only lost 1 game as a result of this, but they lost 2 leads in terms of letting them be cut down. Those leads either be cut down substantially or losing the lead altogether, going down and losing like they did in that game 2. So in the previous series, they did this 3 times, and then against Cavs, they did it twice, which is just more than you would think, given that they only lost 1 game in each round. So that's the first 2 rounds of the 24 playoffs. Then you've got the Indiana Pacers series from the Eastern Conference Finals, where game 1, 133-128, Celtics win in overtime after blowing a 13-point lead. So again, that's another example of this, where they won the game, but they blew the lead, again, kind of like game 3 of the previous series. So there's that one. Then they won 126-110, so they had a 16-point victory, but they let the lead get down to 5-ish, so they blew 10 points off of their 15-point lead, but still a good victory to win by 16 points. So, you could either count that or not, kind of according to my system. It's a little subjective there. And then game 3, they win 114-111, winning by 3 after being down big, but they were up 7 in the first. So, again, that's another lead, but the sort of leads I'm thinking about are especially these substantial double-digit leads in the second half being lost. And so, count that if you want. Don't count it. And then they won game 4, 105-102. So 2 3-point wins at the end of that series and another comeback victory in Game 4. So I think when I'm looking at that series, I would basically count it as them blowing 2 leads, but this is those sort of, or considering those leads blown would be me sort of applying this standard that I'm coming up with in a slightly not extreme, but a little bit beyond what I'm thinking of. So really the big one is probably Game 1, where they lost a 13-point lead. But again, from the watching, it really did seem like it was every game. So if I'm going to properly count, we can count at least 3 in this series, or at least 2, but really 3 in that series. So again, after 3 blown leads in round 1, 2 in the next series, they again went for at least 2 or 3 in a 4-game series against the Pacers. And then in their series against the Mavericks in the finals, they were winning by 27 in Game 1. They won 107-89, so they won by 18, but a 27-point lead went down to an 18-point victory. So something similar to what I'm talking about, but again, a more minor example. Then, Game 2, 105-98, they won by 7, and they were up by a little more, but not enough that I considered it a blown lead of any kind. And then Game 3, they were leading by 19, ended up winning 106-99. So a 19-point lead goes down to a 7-point margin of victory. So 10, 12 points lost off of that. So I definitely consider that one of those examples. And then Game 4, they just got the doors blown off in the one game. The Mavericks won 122-84. And then Game 5, they won 106-88. And they won that one without blowing a lead. So again, if we're counting, they basically blew 1 lead in the finals, again, not leading to a loss. So they only blew 1 there. And when we look at then the 24 playoffs in total, so I would say Game 1 of the Heat, they blew a lead like this. Game 2, they blew a lead like this against the Heat. And then Game 3, they blew a lead like that. So that's 3 in that first round. And then I'm considering the Celtics as having blown 2 leads in the next round against the Cavs. So that's 5 total. And that would be Games 2 and 3 are the games that I'm thinking they blew leads in. So that's from the Cavs. So that's 5 through the first 2 rounds of 24. And then if we're counting, I'm going to count it as 2, since losing a 7-point lead is really not what I'm talking about, but kind of letting a 16 or 13-point leads dwindle down to close games is what I'm talking about. So 2 more, so that's 7. And then we know it's only 1 in the finals against the Mavs. And so obviously that's 7 plus 1 is 8. So that's 8 times in 19 games, last playoff run, that the Celtics allowed a team essentially back into a game when they were beating on them pretty good. And so, again, this is definitely something I noticed at the time. But obviously when a team's going 16-3 in a playoff run, they're going to get some latitude to play the game as they are. but I think you saw it was manifest in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers last year, where the Pacers easily could have won Game 1. They could have won Game 2. They could have won Game 3. Like, literally every game of the Eastern Conference Finals, the Celtics could have lost, even though they won them all. And so that's kind of what I'm pointing to, is that, you know, for example, when I looked at the series this year in the first round against the Magic, which was a pretty close series, tightly played, etc., really didn't feature a lot of super blown leads, in my opinion, although I could recheck that again, because it's possible that it was more so that way, but when I was looking through, it didn't look like there were a ton of examples of the Celtics being up. But, you know, as I roll through this, I'll definitely take a look at that. But clearly what we're thinking about is the 2 games the Celtics just blew against the Knicks, where, again, if you're leading by 20 points in the third quarter, you would expect that team to win. However, it's just not necessarily the case that you're going to win every game in that circumstance. So, you know, they lost 2 games at home, and I would argue, as the strongest road team in the NBA, I have a lot of confidence in their ability to right the ship and to get back to where they are supposed to be in terms of, like, would I be shocked if the Celtics won this series in 6 games? No, I wouldn't, because I do believe they're the better team, but obviously the Knicks are fighting a lot harder than that, and so I'm just quickly taking a peek through the games against the... Yeah, so that's what I thought. When I started looking through the games where Orlando and Boston, the games were either much too close to be the sort of thing I'm talking about here. So probably my imagination starting to make me think that things were going more so this way, but yeah, so there weren't very many examples of this sort of thing of blowing leads, although if I look in, yeah, so game 3 of the last round against Orlando, I guess, would be an example where they were winning by 11 at half and ended up losing by 2. So that's another example of this. So it did happen last round, and I thought that the Celtics were clearly better than Orlando, so the fact that Orlando was as close as they were, I do think that was minorly concerning as they were going through, and again, winning another series in 5 games, but you would hope that their margins of victory could have been a little bit better, but, you know, that's kind of, yeah, and then even in Game 4, it looks like the Celtics sort of got ahead by a bit and then let the game get fairly close by the end within, to a tie game. So they've, and that's, again, not not so much blowing a major lead as just having a small lead and then either letting go of the rope or whatever. But I just think there's a number of examples, like I said, when you can come up with 8 examples in 19 games from last playoffs, and then looking through that round for Orlando and seeing possibly 1 or 2 examples of this, if not 3, you know, this tends to happen to the Celtics on a fairly regular basis. And so on the one hand, this is sort of the team that they are, and I think this current iteration of this team is obviously a very good team. I think that they they play a really interesting, unique style of basketball. It's fun to watch, but then at the same time, I think part of what happens is they shoot so many threes that they will end up shooting themselves into stretches where they're not scoring for several minutes, and then when that happens, the other team can sort of close the gap. And then, like is sort of top of mind right now, is just the Knicks winning 2 games that the Celtics really should have won, but not only because they were leading by large margins in third quarter of 20 points, but also because at the end of the game they had opportunities to win and did not. So I think when we look at this all in total, I'm not an expert, but my sort of general approach would be that one of the steps that needs to be taken is that the Celtics need to, and not to oversimplify, but they need to get into the low post in the sense of they need to, especially with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, I believe they should be getting them the ball in sort of easier situations where they don't have to dribble through the defense to get closer to the basket, but by a combination of passing throughout the play earlier, you essentially set up Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, hopefully with a smaller matchup on them, in the post down low, and give them opportunities. And I don't know if they're, this kind of player, seems like I'm always basically projecting everybody. It's like, just be like Tim Duncan, bro. But it's like, oh, you could just do like a drop step or, spin in and do all sorts of post moves from the post, as well as taking, post fadeaway jump shots potentially. I was watching a highlight video of Robert Parrish the other day, and if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown could shoot half that well from the mid-range in terms of having a back-to-the-basket turnaround shot. And again, just to be able to tap into that as sort of a counter to when the teams are kind of running them off the court, making lots of baskets in a row, and the Celtics are missing threes over and over. I think one of the solutions is just Celtics have to get bodies down low. They need to get them in positions where they're not quite as vulnerable to dribbling into double teams, like the times that Jaylen Brown turns into a tornado when he's doing spin moves 20 feet from the basket, and it's like, hey, bud, like, I don't know if spinning is making, anything happen more effectively or efficiently, especially that far from the rim. But if you could get those guys down closer to the basket, get them good opportunities to shoot, especially if they're in like rotation against Jalen Brunson or whatever, I think, or, Josh Hart is defending Jason Tatum, something like that. Like, I think there's opportunities to get down low and to slow down the game a little bit as well, and to let those guys sort of dictate. And then if they sort of crash on the low post offensive player, then you make the smart pass. You do that, and then you get the open shots that way. So again, I'm not an expert. I couldn't tell you exactly how to run a play to make this happen, or, just stand out there and be like, well, boys, I know this is some weird, like, ancient thinking because J.J. Redick and LeBron James laughed about it and they said no one runs this anymore. But how about running a floppy action? Like, what about the marvelous idea of trying to get Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum open for open jump shots off screens? How about that as a concept? Back screens and getting to the basket. And, how about, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown shooting a catch and shoot jump shot for once, you know what I'm saying? Instead of dribbling all over the place. Like, not to say they can't do that, but again, I think sometimes they have to change things up a little bit and get beyond the, we gonna shoot mentality. And so, so that is to say that as a Celtics fan, and I believe they're playing today. Are they not? If they're not, they're playing tomorrow. But I certainly want to see them, frankly, win this series. I think they're a better team than the Knicks. I think they've been a better team than the Knicks this past year. They were a better team last year. And so, the Celtics, they need to get their shit together a little bit. And they need to, play like themselves and remember that in the 2 games that they've lost, they were winning by 20 points. And they were winning by 20 points for a reason. Again, because they're the better team. And so, oh shit, the game's on 3:30 today. Fucking hell, I'll be watching that today. But, that's the deal, is that, they need to win. And, this could all be a moot point if the Celtics come out and they go ahead and they win, 4 of the next 5 games and get to the Eastern Conference Finals again. Because I think what anybody would say about this team is making the conference finals is a bit of a floor for this version of the Celtics team. Who knows what's going to happen this offseason, I honestly think it's bad juju if I'm going to speculate what I actually think will happen this offseason, which I think is pointing in a particular direction, and I'm not going to say anything more than that, because if you have a brain, frankly, you'll figure this out first, that this is sort of the first place that a educated mind should go in this consideration, even though it's not necessarily what will happen. But again, the Celtics just have to remember that they were the best road team in the NBA, that they're capable of beating the Knicks 4 times in a row, and that I frankly want to see them. I want to see them win, get back to the Eastern Conference Finals. That's the sort of team they are. They are a team that really should go back to the finals at the very least, and so we as fans want to see them continue, and it would certainly be disappointing if they lost in the second round to the Knicks. That would definitely precipitate more sort of more decisions having to be made as far as essentially, my thought process is that the Celtics are likely to try and only lose one of these core players from this team from this year, and I'm saying one in terms of a guy under a long-term contract, or might not have a tremendous amount of years left on the deal, but I'm really only anticipating them trying to basically shed one of those bigger contract players, but it could end up being more than that, and especially if they end up losing. And so, but like we've seen in all these rounds of the playoffs, the lower seeds have been, they've been making a good acquittance of themselves. These games have been very tight. Home court advantage has not been as important. And, we've seen, Jokic has the Denver Nuggets up on the Oklahoma City Thunder 2-1. And I think at various points this season, especially when Denver fired their coach, you might have said, well, the sort of window for the Nuggets to, get back to the finals is closing. But now it appears like it's potentially wide open, and that's because Jokic is playing like the best player in the world. And therefore, the Celtics we need a similar contribution from Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, etc. And I'm confident that they can do that. And so we'll see whether they begin to show the fight that they'll need to demonstrate. And like the Cavs did, I think the Cavs have started to fall victim to losing some of their big leads, and all these sorts of things. Similar thing to the Celtics, where I think when you're one of those great teams, I think that the other team, as a strategic adjustment, they kind of have to start to calculate in. It's like, hey, boys, like this other team, you can almost guarantee they're going to punch us in the mouth and they're going to hit us hard. We're going to be down, 15 plus points, and we have to not panic and understand we're going to get our chance to make our run. And then when we do, we just have to capitalize on it. And so, I anticipate that the Celtics are likely to face the Cavaliers in the conference finals, but frankly, both of those teams are going to have to earn that. And so I think this is coming to the end where I'm going to bring this pod to an end. But long story short, go Celtics, obviously. And then, hopefully they can continue to advance. But I just wanted to get on here and really quickly kind of note how them losing the leads like they have has been slightly disturbingly common in their last couple playoff runs, and therefore you would hope that they could take some steps to address that. So that's it for this time. I'm not gonna worry too much about chatting about the politics for the economic stuff today. Federal Reserve held steady, no rate decreases. Economy contracted in the last quarter. Inflation slightly down. Dmitry Peskov lying about things as usual. Russia not serious about peace as usual. Situations in the Middle East being exactly what they are. All those things notwithstanding, but today was just going to do more of this basketball analysis because I had the idea to do this as a bit of a research project to be like, well, let's not just say that the Celtics be losing leads every single fucking game. It's like, how about we go back and we count and we see how many times they've lost those leads. And so last couple playoffs, basically the total number of times this has happened is sometime between 10 and 12. And that's a lot. And so, hopefully, I want to see the Celtics raise another banner this year. And that means they're going to have to slug it out and continue to fight for their right to continue to play. So, that's the playoffs for you. All right, that's this pod. All right, thanks.